Can you tell me why Pandakraut? Where does your nickname come from?
Oh, this is one of those, you're 13 and it sounds like a great idea at the time and it sort of sticks around. Um, I lived in Germany for a couple of years when I was younger, and I think I had picked up seen the Ramo and Half manga, and at the time, the panda was a funny gag, and so Panda, Germany, here we are.
That's
And
cool.
then a couple of years ago, there's some Swiss casino or something that had uh, the panda and lederhosen that I found at one point. So it was a convenient coincidence.
That's kind of funny. Uh, do you have any family in Germany? Do you visit often?
I used to be there semi regularly. My mom used to do exchange trips. She was a German teacher, so we were over there in the summers, and then I lived there for a year in kindergarten, then a year in high school.
Mhm.
So haven't been back as much anymore, but still love to go there when I can.
Well, do you speak German?
I do. It's a little rusty, but I would say I'm conversationally fluent, maybe.
That's great. Yeah, German is a pretty tough language to learn. Tell me. You mentioned manga maybe before. Do you like to read? Do you like comics? Do you like games?
Yeah, I would say, I play a variety of games across different genres. You know, I would say probably mostly read in like the sci-fi fantasy area, some historical fiction and stuff, but yeah,
But would you call
variety
yourself
of
a
things.
gamer?
Generally, yeah, I play probably too much.
Okay. What kind of games do you play?
I mean, obviously, playing the strategy games. I'll play RPGs, ARPGs, like city builders. Though I haven't really cared for most of those since stuff like SimCity 2000 and like Caesar 3 was sort of the era that I played a lot of that sort of stuff. I'll play pretty much anything that seems appealing. Uh, just sort of bounce around, and I mean, I would say lately, like since I got into like modding, that took up a lot of my free time. So definitely played a lot more of Ultimate General Civil War and stuff. But other than that, I'll also play a lot of Path of Exile. It's you know new content comes out. It's an easy game to turn your brain off and click on things while listening to podcasts and stuff. So
That's very nice. Well, in 2018, JNP Rebalance mod for Ultimate General Civil War was published. Was this your first modding experience?
yeah, I hadn't really done anything prior to that. I came to that game fairly late, and I started playing it and trying to figure out some of the mechanics that didn't seem to be lining up with I was seeing in game. And at the time, another user goes by Johnny he had played around with some of the hex editing and had created a basic mod for it. And I played around with that and then tried to sort of recreate his work and started talking with him. And then we figured out that it was possible to do DLL editing as opposed to just hex editing, and just started seeing what we could change. And, you know, still relatively at it, I guess 5, 6 years later now.
Mhm. And when you started modding, did you know anything about game development, about coding?
So I guess for my actual job, I do insurance software programming. So I would say that's not really the same as game development, but I definitely did have a coding background. Um, but other than that, uh, basically completely self-taught in that. I just sort of opened up the decompiled DLL for Ultimate General Civil War and just started experimenting and trying to learn that code base as best I could. And it was a slow process because not everything is decompiled in a friendly format, and you don't have any, there's no documentation in there in terms of like what is used for what. So it was a slow process, but it was interesting. It was a fun challenge to try and figure out how the game worked.
Well, I guess this is what paved the way for your current employment. Tell me, how exactly did this mod change the game? What was the goal of the mod? What was missing in the original game? And
So I guess at this point we've changed a lot of stuff, but I guess the two main goals were I guess we wanted to make it harder and in some ways more realistic. I would say like the challenge was probably the predominant thing we were going for. Uh, Johnny was one of the, I would say, best players at Ultimate General Gettysburg multiplayer, and could stomp his way through the normal legendary campaign. He was always advocating to make that game harder, and it's one of those cases where it's probably best that devs did not fully listen to him on that because it was challenging enough for many players. So we started out with like reworking all the weapons, changing up how like melee worked. Like we wanted melee to be more dangerous, and let's see. I guess over the years we just added a lot of mechanics to it. Like all of the career points are reworked, all of the perks are redone. Like perks and stats are far more important than they were in the base game. Condition is far more important. Um, we eventually ended up completely revamping how like casualties and veterans work. So there's multiple veteran pools and recruit pools with all their own stats instead of just being able to throw money at infinitely creating more veterans. The entire surrender system is completely reworked, so that basically it uses sort of the idea of if you can get a unit to 0 morale, then they start taking surrender checks, and so you can actually clear units off the field much faster than you can in the base game, where in the base game, unless you get lucky and the unit surrenders, or unless you get lucky and the unit surrenders, the only other option is you have to kill 90% of their HP before they'll completely shatter, which could lead to very long grinding battles. So, sorry, I can keep talking about that forever, but
no, please. I guess they will just route, come back again, and then they will flee, come back again, right?
yeah, you'd get a lot of that. And you just get situations where like by the time you had killed like maybe 50% of a unit, like the unit had no real offensive power left. It wasn't going to charge. It wasn't going to do much damage to you, but it was just going to sit there, and you just would farm it for XP really. And I guess one of the concerns that players had was that like, well, normally you'd expect the unit to just leave the battle and rout. If we had originally looked into like, okay, like, can we just make units route off the field? And you'd think that would be really easy, but I went in circles forever trying to get units to just route off the map. Like that AI certain units can, because you can see it happen in that game, but I could never figure it out. So we ended up coming with an alternate solution, which was this sort of increased chance for surrenders and shatters. So like if you trap a unit on the board edge, it's probably going to get like its morale is going to drop, and you're probably going to make it surrender or shatter. So I think that system worked out really well in that game. It's also a system that I had way too many spreadsheets and way too many variables, and is probably far more complex than it really should have been. So recreating that again would have been interesting, which is partially why that system didn't fully get brought over into American Revolution, because partially the complexity and partially units can retreat off the map in that case. And since you have the tactical battles linked to the global battles, like a unit retreating off map is perfectly fine. Like that unit will survive, it will continue. Whereas in Ultimate General Civil War, once the unit's off the map, there's no AI unit progression from battle to battle, so you've effectively killed the unit, which can turn into problems when you have stuff like edge camping and all kinds of cheese that players will eventually figure out.
Hmm. Well, I'm curious. Do you have any solutions for corner camping in a strategy game like Total War or Ultimate General?
Are you talking more like
A
from
general
the
idea
player?
of from a developer's perspective. Like, is there a way to prevent players from corner camping?
Okay, so you're talking about setting up so that basically your flanks are protected and you're just sitting there.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Basically, it's a very common
Yeah,
strategy, especially in the single player. I see it as kind of a abusing the rules a little bit.
yeah, I can
Easing.
understand
Yeah.
it. I mean, I guess in any scenario where you have fixed board edges, like you're gonna have problems like that. Like there's just no real way around it. Like you can, I think you could somewhat limit the effectiveness in like limiting how much damage you can put out on a given front. So like if you compress your army too small into a corner, like yes, you can't be flanked, but you also can't apply flanking damage yourself, which is I think one of the things that made it not all that effective in Civil War, just because flanking changes that combat so much that like if you're not doing it, you're kind of just playing it efficiently because the units just get ground down and come back over and over. So I think that helped a little bit, but also I guess it just wasn't in that game. It wasn't a problem because you had the scenario battles where normally you had to be defending objectives or you had to be going after them, so you wouldn't do it too often. I guess now that I think about it, I can think of a few battles where you basically can do that, but I think you're usually sitting up in cover more. Um, I guess to go back to the American Revolution side of it, with the way units get set up in the middle of maps, you're often pretty far away from the map edge. I guess you could, if you set it up right, I guess you could do it. I'm not sure there's really a point. Like, I guess when I see screenshots of players who are doing that sort of thing, I always kind of look at it and I'm like, I feel like you would actually be better off spreading out the AI and like trying to get around on flanks than you would just like trying to prevent them from flanking you. And I guess that's just because I look at the player is always going to be better at setting up flanking situations than the AI is. Like you can make the AI as good as you want. The player's going to figure out how it works, what it prioritizes, and exploit that. Like I guess that's kind of how I look at how to play these games, is that players are going to do that. And I know not everyone plays that way, but
So,
sorry, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but
basically by making sure that player can benefit more from fair engagement, quote unquote, than actually corner camping because you get a lot of flanking bonuses, rear bonuses, and stuff like that.
yeah, give the player incentives to do something other than just sit back and, you know, hope that their cannons will fire infinitely and kill off the enemy that way. And I feel like we're in a decent state there, though maybe others would disagree with me on that. But
Well, people have freedom to play the game however they
yeah,
feel
if
like,
if
and
that's what you want to do, then go for it. Like I enjoy optimizing how to play these games to a certain extent myself, but I'm also a big fan of just like if you want to play differently, please play differently. Like that was one of the things that I think worked well between Johnny and I when we were working on the JMP mod. Is he was a very aggressive melee focused player, and I am basically the complete opposite, where I will sit back and like try and turn any offensive battle into a defensive battle and just let cannons shoot forever, and you know that's just very opposing play styles. So I thought it was useful to have multiple different perspectives on how to approach the game there.
hmm. Well, you told me before about your John in working on this mod. What do you think that is a role of modding community in today's gaming?
I mean, it can be a lot of things, but I guess I think it's just a good opportunity to expand on a concept that's already interesting. Like, it, modders are always going to have more time to try and continually perfect or tweak or add to a game than developers will in most cases. Like, it's just sort of the reality of how game development goes in a lot of cases. So like it's nice when there's mod support so that you can go in there and just see like what you can adjust. And I think it also has a lot of value in that, not everyone wants the same type of game. And like you can look at one game and be like, that is so close to what I want, but I hate X, Y, and Z. And modding lets you go in many cases and like tweak some of that stuff so that it's more what you want to play than like sometimes players and the developers disagree on like what sort of game they want to make. I guess one of the things, like when I was modding, I started out and it was pretty much here's what we want to do, here's the exact experience we're giving you. And over time that very much changed to in a lot of ways it's easier to just provide a giant spreadsheet of options and be like, okay, you want to change this, you want to change this, you know, some of that, like one person could look at that and say like that's a cheat mod, and the other would say, well, that's how I want to play, that's fun. So I mean, some of that stuff I added because it's convenient to have just changeable attributes so you can go in and modify in a text file as opposed to actually having to go in and code something up every time. But over time it just turned into, well, okay, like people want this, we'll just put this option in, even if I never want to play this way. It's there. If you want to use it, go for it. There's always save editors available. There's always, any game that has a save function, like you can save scum if you want to, like, I mean, or just save reload. You don't even need the negative connotation there, but people play out as they like.
Well, you mentioned that it was quite difficult to get into modding because of all the restrictions there were. I'm under the impression that more and more companies are limiting access to modding tools, and what would their motivation be for doing that?
I guess I wouldn't say I had heard that, but I don't know. This is just my opinion, but I would guess in a lot of cases it has more to do with the time necessary to put those tools together than anything else. Like, I mean, I would think back to like the really old, like Total Wars, like the original Rome. Modding
Medieval, yeah.
was, my understanding is modding was largely a bunch of text files. Like you could replace all the maps, like all kinds of stuff. But as the engines got more advanced, it became harder to expose that information to the players to be able to change it. And I think that's partially where we are with like the Ultimate General games. Is it's a small team. There's already too many issues to work on. Like I know people, like you see it all the time. People are like, oh, you should make a map editor, but a map editor is not just, oh, flick a switch, here you go. Like that's okay. That's an entire another program. Like that's a user interface. That's syncing with the game itself. Like there's so much that goes on with that I think people don't realize. And I would say, like, even from coming from modding, like modding gave me like a decent insight of how a lot of stuff was set up in those games. But now having actually gotten into the actual Unity project and seeing how stuff is set up, there's some things that were pretty easy to do in modding because I don't care about any of the side effects. Like, I don't have to worry about localization. I don't have to worry about, breaking weird edge cases that not enough people play the mod to really ever come up. Or if they do, it's just like, well, sorry, it doesn't work. Like, I'll help as much as I can, but past a point, the answer is sometimes just, sorry, I can't fix this for you. And I feel like that answer goes over better in a modding context than it does as an actual developer. As soon as money gets involved, and people understandably get a little bit more upset about that sort of stuff. So I guess, sorry, to wind back to the answer, I'm not sure. I wouldn't think that people are necessarily restricting modding. I think it's just, as games get more complex, it also gets more complex to enable the modding. I'm sure there's probably cases where like copyright stuff gets involved, and then sometimes like modding does get locked down a little bit more, and I think that's unfortunate when that happens, but I don't think in most cases that's what's driving it. But again, I haven't really heard about that, so maybe I'm just not in the right space of gaming to have run into those problems.
Maybe depends on company, and I'm glad you brought maybe Rome 1 and Medieval 2. They were very famous for modding community, like the ability to create your own map and cities on it. I think it's not available in newer Total mods or Total War mods. I think that since Empire it wasn't available, really, you could change some units, but you really could not change the map. And I think it was purposeful in many ways because I think the gaming companies rely more and more on DLCs for revenue. So if modders are creating free maps and experiences, then maybe companies would lose ability to sell DLCs. I think this is one of the reasons some companies would go above
Yeah,
and beyond.
I could see that. I don't know. I always try and in some ways I try to be an optimist, and I look at it and I'm like, is this someone, cackling in the corner being like, okay, we're gonna make this, so we don't want them to do it. Like in some cases, like we know that happens. Like you could find examples of modding projects that get shut down because it's too close to something the company is working on. But I do think in a lot of cases it's very time consuming to make those tools and support that sort of stuff, so it just doesn't happen. But I think to an extent you are right that as DLC became more popular, it's like you do want to preserve that window a little bit. But I don't know. I guess some of it is also I feel like in a lot of cases the reach of the mods is so much smaller than what you would see from any sort of official release. So I'm always kind of the opinion of like the more you put out there, the more everyone benefits. Like if you have a mod that's really cool and then a DLC that is similar comes out, like okay, great, now you have two things. They're probably not going to be the same. Hopefully, people enjoy both of them.
Well, sometimes this can actually prolong the life of the game. People are
Yeah,
modding. They
absolutely.
maybe people gonna buy game in 5 years or 10 years from now. There are ups and downs in both situations. Well, going back to now, basically you're working on Ultimate General American Revolution, and the game is in development for how long?
I'm trying to think of when it started. I don't know for sure. I definitely know like it was like they were. I want to say they were working on it back in around 2020. I don't want to give a definitive date because I don't know for sure. Um, I definitely know that that development got stretched out by. I mean, most of the developers are in Ukraine, and
Mhm.
there have obviously been some circumstances there that have slowed things down. So it's definitely been I think a bit longer development than was originally planned.
Okay, and how does a company come up with the, name of the title? Who decides? Okay, this is the new title we're working on.
So that decision is definitely above my pay grade. So I don't really know. But I guess I'll share one story, which this was back with Age of Sail. There was a a question early on of should it be called Ultimate General or Ultimate Admiral, and I think there was a small poll with this was in I want to say this was in either the closed beta or the public beta or something like that. There was a poll, and I think like Ultimate Admiral won, and I swear that name has caused more problems with people who come in and are like, well, it says Admiral. Why am I ever commanding land units? Or what? Basically, why are there naval units and ground units in the same game? This is a terrible idea. Why did anyone do this? And it's just like, well, that was kind of the core idea. And the game was almost called By Land and by Sea, which has you can debate if that's a better name or not, but it would have at least indicated yes, there are naval and land elements to it. So again, I don't really know how they come up with them in the long run, but I just thought that was a funny story of you'd think this is not too complicated, and then people come in with impressions, and that's the way they think about it. So it definitely matters.
Mhm. Well, you mentioned that a lot of developers are from Ukraine, and how many people are actively working now on the game?
I think it's somewhere between like 8 to 10. I know there are other contractors and stuff involved, so I don't know exactly how many it is, but that's the numbers I've heard previously.
Mhm. Okay, and you mentioned being a modder for a couple of years, and now you're working as a developer. What is the difference? How is there a different feel to this, being a developer and being a modder in the game?
Yeah, it's definitely a little different. Like, there's definitely more. Like, there's certainly more of a timeline to follow when you're not modding. Because, like, with modding, like, you work on it when it's interesting and it's fun, and maybe you put out a big patch and then you just let it sit for a while and see how people play it, and wait to gather feedback before you change anything else. But like with the actual game, it's like there's always another thing to work on. There's always more bugs. Um, obviously there's more people playing it, so you get more feedback, you get more bugs, so there's just more to do. I mean, it's definitely has the upside of, if there's certain things with the modding that you just have to accept it. Okay, this can't be changed, or if it can be changed, I do not know enough about that particular section of coding to be able to do it. And here it's nice because you have full access to everything, which means there's stuff you can add that you otherwise couldn't, and that you have other people who have been working on these games for years to you know provide input and like work on solutions to things that are just not something that I'm particularly good at.
Well, uh, you say that you've been playing this type of game for a very long time, and for people that are familiar with the franchise but have not played American Revolution, how is this different from its predecessors?
So the previous games were, I guess I would describe them as a series of scenario battles where you carry over your army between them. And this is much more I guess, an open campaign where battles can occur, but it is much more freeform in your decision making on what you want to happen. And I guess, obviously it also has a much more in-depth economy and so on and so forth. So I don't really like this description in some ways, but I guess it's a much more strategic game where you could say the previous games were much more tactical. You can get into debates on the nuances there, but so I guess it's the easy description is it's a Total War style game with the more Ultimate General style of tactical battles.
Well, what were the challenges of creating such a game when you have a real-time grand campaign, you have real-time battles, and it's a wide scope, sandbox, but with history?
I mean, it's so much larger than the previous games. So there's so many more mechanics that can interact, so much more that can go wrong. I know there's people who always ask, "Oh, how did this possibly not get tested?" And it's like there's always a million fires, and there's so many different things to interact with. There's only so much time. It's like, so what are we focusing on testing? And the unfortunate downside to programming is, you can make a change, and you're like, okay, this is only going to affect this. I only need to test this. Oh, it actually affected this thing over here, which we didn't even think about, and that stuff just happens. So, I mean, my focus is more on the like tactical battle balance side, and like even there, it's a much more complex game than the previous titles because there's considerably more unit types. You have like the merging of both the player and the AI, which the AI never merged in the previous games, so you didn't have to deal with unit sizes of different types.
Mm.
Um, I mean, you also have the real-time combat in both the tactical battles and on the global map, and those need to try and, the global map combat is, I would say, a simplified version of the tactical battle, like combat mechanics. But you need those results to hopefully try and line up relatively similar, because otherwise the player looks at it and says, well, why would I ever do this when I can do that and just get a better result every time? Um, because some players are going to want to sit there and never play a single tactical battle, and in theory that should work. Like, you should be able to play the game that way. Others will never play the global battles, and that should also be an option.
Well, you also have game testers. Are these volunteers? Are they paid game testers? How does it work?
There is, I believe, one paid QA person who also does some other tasks. And then we have the alpha testers who are all volunteers.
Mhm. Well, I think they are doing a pretty good job, but as you said before, it's impossible sometimes to play the game enough times to spot some of the problems, and this is where the community comes in. Before we talk a little bit more about community, let's talk about the scope of this project. So, getting into this one, did your team have a fixed idea of what the project scope should be and like what game mechanics would exist, exactly how they would work, or did you have just a general idea and were ready to experiment during the development process?
So I only joined the project like as a developer about a year ago. So I was involved like more as like an alpha tester prior to that for longer, but I would not say I had insight into like that level of the designing process like back then. Um, I certainly think like you start off with an idea of sort of like where you're going, and you put that together, you sort of set it up as well as you think you can, and then you have to let players interact with it and see, like, does it work? Like, does the mechanic like do what it's supposed to do? Like, are players enjoying it? Is it too complex? Is it not complex enough? And like, lots of people have different ideas, and sometimes they fit into the game and sometimes they don't, or sometimes they clash with other things that you're planning on doing. So you definitely try and take good ideas when you see them, and I think some of it is also just like the creative process. Takes time sometimes. Like, you look at one system and you set something up and you think, oh, okay, that'll work, and then you come back to it a couple months later and you look at it and you're like, what the heck? And why did I do it this way? This is a much better way of doing it. We should do it this way now. So it's just sort of an ongoing process.
Well, I've been playing this game for maybe 8 or 9 months now, and I can testify that economy has changed a couple of times so far, and it's getting more and more complex. It's getting better. But how do you guys decide? Okay, it's time for change. This might not be working, or let's transform this into something else.
I guess I can only really speak to myself on that, and I think it's, let's see, what's a good way to answer this? I mean, sometimes it's just you play the game, or you watch people play in the game, or you like see the reports coming in, and you're like, okay, this system, which works okay, is just not as good as I want it to be. So what can we do to improve it? Or you'll see persistent issues that are just, they keep coming up with the existing system. So it's like, okay, we got to solve this problem somehow. Um, I know players have their own opinions on how they think to solve those problems, and sometimes we agree with that, and sometimes we don't. Um, Sometimes what seems like a great idea on concept, like if you have a little more insight behind the scenes, is either an incredible amount of work or is going to have a lot of side effects that are going to cause other problems, which are, more and more work on top of that. Sometimes, you have a system that's, I guess maybe I should say, there's a lot of compromises that go on with it. So, you know, there are very few systems that I think we will look at and say, oh, that is perfect. Sometimes you look at it and you're like, okay, that's good enough for now. If we have more time later, maybe we'll come back to it and adjust it. Or, maybe that's just how it's going to be for the time being.
Mhm. And well, how much do you value user feedback? Like, have there been instances where you decided to change game mechanics due to user reports or bad feedback from users?
Oh, very frequently. Like, there's a number of changes that have directly come from someone brings it up, someone looks at it and says, "Yeah, that's a good idea. That's not too much work. Let's do it." Um, I think some of it comes from just the devs looking at things and thinking, "How can I improve this?" Some of it is, in some cases, like there have been pretty drastic shifts where, early on in development, the statement was, sorry, no, this is just not going to be a thing. And over time, then that decision changes, whether that's from, you know, changing your mind and saying, okay, yeah, that is actually a thing, or yes, we should spend the time and effort to get that in there. It's a net benefit to have this in there, despite the time it's going to take. I can think an example of that is like the deployment boxes. Like initially, the idea is, you're gonna move your units on the global map, get them into position, and then whatever that position is, that's what you have to deal with once you get into the tactical battle. So like you do all your maneuvering and stuff beforehand. Obviously, as people played it and set armies up in different ways, like you encountered all kinds of problems where it's just very beneficial to be able to do small adjustments to where those units are lined up instead of just having whatever the auto deploy is. And that also helps because, every once in a while, players will come up with a really odd situation that the deploy logic just doesn't really cover. And then, it just results in a frustrating system to the player. So yeah, I guess overall, like I try and read everything that gets posted on Discord, which some days feels like a mistake, but I try and do it just so I see every amount of feedback that gets in there. I go through most of the reports. Many of them are in areas that are just not my specialty, so they go to other devs, but I just try and see them to see what's going on. And I guess in terms of user feedback, like I always like to have more context on where the person is coming from. Like, what difficulty are they playing? How do they like to play? What were they doing at the time? You'll get people who, get very frustrated with something. And sometimes if you, talk them through it and like explain like, oh, yeah, this is what the game is trying to do. I know it didn't work out for you, or, like what exactly were you trying to accomplish when you got this result, which didn't work? I feel like I can get more information from that than if, just whatever the like top level report is. And, I have the benefit of, English is my primary language, so I can communicate a little better on Discord than some of the devs can. But that's how I tend to like to work. I also like certainly for the mod, I would spend a lot of time like watching playthroughs from players, just see how they were approaching battles and how they were like what pain points they were having. I definitely have found that is much harder for me to do with American Revolution, just because like it's just I guess what's the way to describe it? It's in a battle in Ultimate General Civil War, I can sort of look at it and jump from point to point, and it's a pretty like a lot of battles play pretty similarly. But with American Revolution, it's more okay. I need to watch a 4-hour stream, which might have 30 minutes of battles in it, and a bunch of other like economy, just fiddling with economy stuff, which is not really my focus. But it's sort of hard to. It's just it seems like the streams are very long, and it's hard to find the time to actually go through all of it. And if I skip through it, then you never know when people are going to be commenting on stuff. Like I could try and just jump around, but I might miss the actual like important feedback earlier on in the video. So I haven't come up with a good solution for that yet. I just try and poke my head into where I can occasionally and get what feedback I can out of those. But I'd like to watch more, but I just don't have time.
Well, I see you're very active on people's streams, videos, commenting on your guys' Discord channel, and you said that sometimes you read too much. And how do you deal with particularly like negative comments or even mean ones? Do they get to you sometimes?
Oh yeah, I mean I'm human. Like I try to have a lot of patience. I run out of patience sometimes, and sometimes I say things that I probably shouldn't, but I try and always at least keep it polite. Like I'm a really big fan of like if you can keep a community like trying to find solutions and like trying to be positive, I feel like that results in a better overall community and you get more out of it than if everyone is just constantly being extremely negative about stuff. And, I mean, I know that isn't always possible, but and again, like people get very invested in the game. They get they play it a lot and they get very frustrated with things that they don't like about it, and like, it's completely understandable. I just unfortunately I don't feel that sometimes people need to vent, and I guess that's fine. But it's the sort of thing you look at and it's like, okay, can't take it personally, can't worry about it. In most cases, probably in some cases you can try and talk people down, but that's pretty time consuming. And I found like that is something I was able to do pretty successfully, I would say, within the modding space, but it's not been as easy to do with this game. And I mean, it's like I looked at the Discord memberships the other day, and it's like, okay, there's 3 to 4 times as many people in this the official Discord as there it was to the modding one. So you get more people, you just don't have time. So yeah, I guess.
Well, I've been frustrated with the
Sorry.
games before, this one and other games, and whenever you're so frustrated, it's never about the game. It's about you. Like, if you don't like something, you can complain about it. Like, go outside, play another game. It's always about a person. And what these people don't really understand is that you don't care more about the game the developer does. Because, okay, maybe you're playing a couple of tens of hours or hundreds of hours, but developers spending thousands of hours on this game. And there is no way you care more about it. So just like chill. Sometimes it's very important the way you communicate with people. If you're very aggressive, people are gonna be dismissive of your opinions and ideas, even though they make sense. It's very important how you approach the problem, how you talk about it. So,
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like it's it's I mean, you'll get the classic case of someone comes in and is upset at the game, and if the first thing they get is someone being like, "Oh, you need to get better" or whatever, like that's not going to work. You're more than likely all you're going to do is start a fight, like which accomplishes nothing. Um, so yeah, it's always optimally you're always responding to that with, okay, here's what you can do better. Here, like I understand, like here's what we can do to try and make this a better experience for you, or at least have you understand a little better like what the game is trying to do, even if it's not resulting in a fun experience right now. Um, yeah, you're just always going to have more success at that than you know. Like if someone says the game sucks and you call them an idiot, you're not going to change their mind. Like 0% chance. Like so, you can. You might be a low percentage chance if you go in with another approach, but at least like there's a chance for something to happen there. Um, I would definitely say like that is one of the things that is frustrating to see is the people who think that the devs don't care about the game. Like if we didn't care about the game, like why would we be doing this? Um, it's we're trying to make something that's fun to play. Like that might not be the exact thing that is fun for you to play, but like we're trying to make something that's good. Like that's all it is. And we're not sitting here trying to intentionally hide stuff from you. We're not trying to make mechanics that screw you over. A lot of times it's just, yeah, no, it'd be great if we could display this, and this, for a long technical reason that's not easy to just do. And we try and get as much of that in there as we can, but it's not always possible. You see a lot of people who wish, like it was interesting to see. For years with the old Ultimate General games, everyone was like, "Oh, it'd be so much better if there was an open campaign. There's no replayability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." Now we have an open campaign, and it's like, and then you get the opposite reaction of, "Oh, well, I like the old battles better. Why isn't this like the old game?" So yeah, I feel like you're always going to get some of that reaction. The people who are happy aren't going to say anything. The people who are unhappy are the ones who you're going to hear from. So it's just probably sort of a natural progression there. But
Well, telling me that you're responsible for battles, and maybe previous games had more of a pace to it. Reinforcements come in and you fight, and again reinforcements comes in. This time around it's quite different. There are massive armies fighting. Sometimes I had like over 20,000 men simultaneously on the battlefield. How is this a challenge to train AI to actually work properly and do what it should do?
well, I think it's always easier to make things look better when you have the set scenario. Like if you know when the units are coming in, you know what the terrain's going to be, you know what the objectives are, it's always going to be easier to make it look like the AI knows what it's doing. Like we're working within a system that is, it's not a human player. It's never going to be a human player. You can, at the very best, you make the player think that they're playing against something intelligent, but until someone can figure out how to, use machine learning or whatever else, like to try and replicate that, which from everything I've seen, I don't think that's anywhere close. You just, you either have your multiplayer experience where you're playing against an actual person who can respond, or you're going to get something that, does its best to present an engaging experience. With American Revolution, where you have these battles that are completely freeform, the player could be, it could be anything from like two armies clumped up right next to each other to units interspersed and intermingled all over the place. So you're just sort of, you're stuck trying to get a generic solution that works as well as it can in as many situations as possible, and there's always going to be edge cases where it doesn't work out. Certainly, I know a lot of people like the AI in Ultimate General Civil War, and there are parts of it that I think are really good. Having played that game for 4,000 hours now, like I could pick the AI apart because I know exactly what it's going to do in 90% of cases. So if you learn enough, like you can break most of these sort of systems. I do think the scenario battles that are being added are hopefully going to help with that, because obviously, again, when you have a scenario, you can set things up a little bit more. I do agree. I do see what people are saying about like the pacing was very different in those old battles, and maybe if the reinforcement system had been designed a bit differently, you could have replicated that some more. But I guess I'm not sure if that system would be redesigned enough to try and replicate that from what we have at the moment.
Well, have you guys thought about putting timers on the reinforcements? Visual for player to see?
Yeah. Timers are tricky in this with this series because in many cases, I think that adding timers to these battles would make them better. Like I don't think that it's a good idea. It's good that players can just infinitely sit and regen condition, that they can, shell with artillery for forts for, 3 days straight. But if you add those timers in, now you start getting into the, well, okay, I would have had enough time to do this in reality, but this arbitrary game mechanic timer stopped me, which is a problem the old games have had, forever. Um, so I don't know. In my personal opinion, I feel like timers add a good way to add incentive to the player to actually have to accelerate their plans. Like you can't just take the super cautious, grind them down bit by bit approach. Sometimes like you need to take this objective now, and that might cost you extra casualties. You need to decide what it's worth to you. So I feel like in a lot of cases timers are beneficial. I kind of doubt they will get added to the game, beyond what we have with some of the scenario battles where,
Mhm.
if you hold the objective after a certain point, you can end the battle. Um, I just it's been such a divisive thing in the community that I'm not sure that it would get added.
Well, I guess this game is a lot about history, and starting from various events, characters, maps, weapons, equipment. Uh, did you guys need to hire a consultant, or is it only relying on history buffs in the team? Who's responsible for keeping up with the
I
history?
So like there's definitely individual research that people will do on specific aspects. I am not really the person who did a lot of that work, so I don't know for sure how that process worked. Like I would say the researching side for a lot of that was definitely done by other people, and I don't have insight into that. I'll definitely like when I'm trying to get information like that, I'll definitely like try and search around and see what I can find. Sometimes you can find really good posts online, sometimes you can't. I definitely am not, I don't have the bookshelf full of the reference material to go find that. It's always great when you get people who show up who do have that sort of information. It tends to get a little contentious so that the people who have that knowledge tend to prefer the more realistic side of it and don't want the game to stray from that. And I guess my personal preference has always been like historical accuracy is a great starting point and a great guideline, but like gameplay concerns should win out in terms of like the final result. Like even though it was exactly this way historically, maybe that doesn't work so well with the game you're making, and if you adjust it a little bit, I think it's a more interesting thing. Like the example I would use is, historically rifle units basically didn't exist in the Revolutionary War. Like the Ferguson was, it existed, it was used. It didn't exist in any real meaningful capacity. But from a game perspective, like it's good for the player to have progression and have alternative options. And if you add rifle weapons in, now okay, now I have this unit type which functions distinctly differently from this other unit type, which just gives me another angle to approach the game. Or like, it's nice to be able to get this future tech weapon, say for whatever reason, we're in an alternate reality that it actually got mass produced and used or something like that. Great. Gives you something to go for in the end game. So I feel like again, history is a great starting point, and then you want to tweak from there to get a game that's fun to play.
Game is kind of historically accurate. Those rifles are very difficult to produce, so it would take forever to equip all of your skirmishers with those, right? Can be fun.
It's difficult. I would personally probably make it harder, but I don't think that is. I guess maybe that's another tidbit. Is it's switching from the mod to the game. It's definitely the mod was very tweaked towards a very specific subset of players, and like when you're making the game, it needs to be a little more accommodating. I would say, like in the mod, I made the hardest difficulty way too hard for most players. Like 99% or more players are not going to have fun playing it. The 0.5% of players who want that are going to have a great time, but extending that level of difficulty or restrictions to a more general product, I just that's something that belongs in a mod, not in a general thing. Maybe if we had time to add more difficulties or something, you could add a super difficult mode or something, but difficulty is tricky because you're always going to have people who find it too easy, you're always going to have people who find it too hard, and hopefully you can provide something in between that most people are going to have fun with.
Well, this is one of my bigger complaints to start off. The game initially was super difficult. I think that now it's getting better, getting easier, and I think that's pretty good. I think that players on easier or normal difficulty should have a fun time without being too concerned or overly concerned about capabilities of AI and the buffs the AI gets. This game is very difficult. I think it applies to most strategy games. The barrier to entry is very high. You need to think about a lot of things before you can start being successful in the game. So if it's very difficult, I think that a lot of people will just quit. And I've seen some negative Steam reviews with people that believe that game mechanics are too complex or too difficult, and they play the game for a couple of hours and they just quit. What have you done in the previous couple of months to make game more playable for beginners and more appealing towards beginners?
I mean, there's certainly difficulty is something that's pretty much constantly being adjusted. We've changed the invasion mechanic more than a dozen times. It's you'll see posts that are like, oh, the devs like it out as it is. They aren't going to change it. And it's like, to an extent that's true, but like we've been adjusting those numbers constantly to try and get them into a better spot. And we seeing sort of a slingshot effect of we moved it pretty far one direction, and now players wanted to move it. Some players want to move it back the other direction, and it's always a trade-off of, are you making it easier in this way, or are you making it harder in that way? I believe I don't know this for sure. I didn't do these changes, but I believe easy and normal have been getting additional bonuses to the player in terms of stuff like resource generation or event occurrences and stuff. Again, don't take that as set in stone. Like I said, I didn't do those changes, but I believe that sort of stuff has been going on. We've also been, as we can, try to put in like better tooltips that provide the player with the information they need to try and make those decisions. We've tried to put in more of the beginning tutorial content to try and get players to understand some of those systems. I mean, tutorials are a super difficult thing because, we could in theory put pages and pages of tutorial text at the start of the campaign, but no one's going to read that, or very few people are going to read that, or they're going to read part of it and then say, I've got this, I understand how to do this, I'm going to move on to the next thing, and then they're going to miss stuff that they don't know how to do. So tutorialization, I think, is a very difficult thing to get right, and I know we've done some with that. I think there's more that could be done with it. Let's see, what else have we been doing?
Tutorial videos are actually really good. They're not covering all the game mechanics, but the core ones, I think they're really good. And I understand they require a lot of time to make visually, and everything is correct. My biggest concern is lack of transparency. I think the game got better, but I don't think it's where it should be. You said that you can make like a huge text with a bunch of game mechanics or numbers. I would love to see that. Maybe not inside of the game, but like a game wiki or something like that would help players so much. For example, inability to tell some of the numbers or how much units cost to maintain or how much they cost to recruit or construction numbers when it comes to regions. A lot of things are there for you guys, but they're not for us. Like we as players, we cannot see them. And I feel like developers have an idea. Okay, we know how things work, but players do not. Like I did a lot of testing with game mechanics, and I was many times very surprised at the way they worked. Had no idea they worked that way. So I would like to see more transparency in the future.
Well, and I think with some of those things, part of the issue is not that the information is hidden from the player, but that the information is sometimes buried a little too deep. Like you can get at it, but it's not present at the point that you want to be making that decision, or it's not not front and center enough. So hopefully that's something we can improve when we have time. I guess just sort of in a general topic of transparency. I feel like there's a balance with it because you want the player to be able to understand the mechanics they need to be able to make good decisions, but you don't want to overwhelm the player with a bunch of extra stuff that would just complicate things. Like, for example, like I've seen over the years, I've seen people be like, okay, like, can you show me the like exact like damage calculation of like when you fire a unit? And like, let's just say there's like 20 different variables involved, but of those, like maybe 3 of them matter to the player. Like, the exact numbers of altitude damage or the exact numbers of like the exact effect of condition on your damage. Like I feel like when you start getting to the level of providing that sort of information, like there's a small subset of players who are going to want that, and then a whole lot of players who are going to look at a giant wall of numbers and ignore it. So I feel like the goal there is that the mechanics behave intuitively enough that you don't need to know exactly how they work. You just need to think, oh, my condition's low, my unit's going to perform worse. Great. I don't need to know it performs, exactly 23% worse. I just need to know it performs worse. So I think there's some back and forth with that. That's not to say that I think that all the tooltips and stuff in the game are in a perfect spot. Like many of them definitely need work. I'm working on trying to update all of the mercenary tooltips to give you the information that you need to decide on those closer to when you actually make that decision. So that's something I'm working on right now. Just trying to. That's definitely a case where, like, I know the information because I set all that stuff up, and technically you can see that information in the game, but unless you're looking, like, I went back to try and verify it and tried to find it, and I had trouble finding it, and I did the work. So obviously that needs to be improved. So that's something I'm working on right now. But
Well, that's for sure. My problems are more general in purpose. Like I talked about construction numbers. It's very important, especially at the beginning of the campaign, to know where you can get your copper mines quicker. There's always a way you can kind of bypass this. Like you click there, you cancel it. You click there, you cancel it. The same is with production numbers. If we talk about raw materials, there is no number in the game week to week. You kind of have to save and go back and see what the numbers were before, stop all the production. Pardon me. You can get through the hoops to get your numbers, but it's not very user friendly. The same is with recruiting units. You recruit units, it says like, oh, 1/5 of your company costs this much, but it doesn't say your full company gonna cost you in maybe 2 days this much, plus the multiplier for this. Like, I believe these are very, very big decisions that you have to make as a player, and sometimes the data is not available or is well hidden for the player, and this is something that's you guys already have. It's already in the game. What I'm asking for is more transparency, so I can make my own decisions with this. I'm not asking for all the particular details of combat. I'm just asking for something that's already in the game, and I think that a lot of players would benefit from having those numbers available. That's it. The
Yeah,
same as you have
I
like a
definitely
financial
agree.
report. It would be great to have other reports for raw materials or production numbers or uh, yeah, I understand that you guys have a bigger fish to fry. Probably you have other things to work on, but this is very important when it comes to game testing because sometimes numbers can be very much off, and it's very difficult for game developers or a few alpha testers to properly test the game. But hundreds of players can, and we can see the problems where you guys cannot. So, but if we had the good transparency, we could help you to make game better. If I cannot tell the numbers, then I cannot know if something is wrong or working properly. So
Yeah, and some of those things are stuff that I like. Like I know the construction materials I started looking at briefly, and I don't remember what exploded that distracted me from it, but something came up, and I just never got back to it. So yeah, so like some of that stuff is things that like I would like to do. I just haven't gotten there, and sometimes like just to pull back the curtain a little bit, like sometimes that information like is in the game, but it's not necessarily easily accessible at the point in the UI that you need it. So like the work to get that in displaying is sometimes not as trivial as it might seem. Um, but yeah, I agree. Like more having more summary information on like the construction materials would definitely be useful. Being able to see the construction times before you click it, definitely, yeah, like a hover tooltip or something, so you can see that right away without having to click and cancel would be good. I have to look into that and see. I don't know if that. I don't remember what we have set up there at the moment.
well, another thing from a player's perspective is that game campaign is very long. Depending on the difficulty you play, you can be like maybe spend 40, 50 hours on stream just playing a single campaign, which is great. It's a lot of fun. But there are points where the game is not as fun, and we talk about maybe construction. Especially if you play the U.S. campaign, your map opens up, and you kind of have to deal with a lot of colonies. There's nothing that's constructed, so you have to worry about settlement level construction, regional level construction. There needs to be a tool that can help a player easily navigate colonies. So colony, region, settlement level. Even if it takes the entire screen, this could help you so much because sometimes I spend 30 minutes. I see other players like spend 30, 40 minutes just covering the basic construction after the map opens up, which is not a lot of fun, right? So the same is with replacing weapons for units. When you get new technology, you want to replace weapons, but you have like 100 regiments. That's not an easy thing to do. And I know this is not a priority for you guys, but would be a really, really nice thing to have in the future. And sometimes the value of the game is not just how many hours you spend it, but how many hours of your time spent in is actually fun, and you spend actually combating or planning or thinking than doing like manual work.
Yeah, like for example, I was thinking about the mass upgrading of companies in a regiment the other day, and I agree it would be much easier if you could do it that way. I was just thinking through it, and I was like, okay, this is a problem. This is a problem. This is a problem. Like, okay, are you upgrading upgrading all infantry regiments? Like, what happens if you don't have enough weapons for like you only have enough weapons for a partial amount? Like now you have to get there's just a lot of ways that is like it's not as simple as add a button, upgrade all, because there's a lot of edge cases where you shouldn't actually upgrade all, or you can't, or it's like, does it apply to the skirmishers? What happened? Like, does it apply to your artillery? It,
Well, I was thinking
so
of
it's not
maybe.
something I disagree with. It's just
Mhm.
it's just more complex than it might seem. I agree it would be a great function to have, and it might happen. I don't know for sure. I would say there's not a short-term plan to add that specifically. Um, Sorry, what was the other thing that you talked about? The construction stuff.
Yeah, this is a place where you could also have doctrines, for example. So you can see immediately if there is a doctrine in a region or how many doctrines are active. You can see all the basic stats for the region, so you can turn them on, turn them off. That would be super useful having all those things together. Uh,
Because like right now you need to switch between what the colonies tab and I don't remember what the other one's called at the moment, but there's a couple different tabs you have to switch to mount to deal with all that, right?
yeah,
That's
of
the issue.
course. And also, if we talk about missions, missions are very important, especially when it comes to construction, recruitment, loyalty. Having them at the same time, that would be phenomenal. Like having
Okay.
to
Yeah, you
ability to
want it
see
you want it
everything
all
within
on a
one
single
screen,
screen,
basically.
not
That's it.
not spread out across multiple menus.
And we have lists of cities in the game. The problem is they're not related to their regions or colonies. They're mainly like alphabetical order, counter alphabetical order, whatever. The problem is that you cannot really focus on a specific region or specific colony. And as I said, as the map opens up, you have to go and manually click every single
Yep.
region, check all the settlements. This is a problem. And when we talk about weapons, I think that it's better to have a maybe company type of change. So all the companies that belong to like militia or fusiliers, you can change their weapons and you can create a specific buffer. So if the weapon count is higher than 3,000, then the next company will receive these weapons. But in case of something happening, this will be I don't know, trying to create new regiments or suffering casualties during the battle. You can use this buffer of like whatever you decide it is, 2 or 3,000 weapons to kind of get new units back into play. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that will save up a lot of time for the player and will make game much more enjoyable than it is right now.
You don't want to have to click on every single company and set the weapon on every single company.
Yeah, that's right.
Definitely understand. Um, yeah, I guess I definitely UI stuff is not really my thing, so I can't necessarily commit to anything one way or the other. But I definitely understand that it's an issue, and
I'm
hopefully
not
that is
expecting
something
you
that
to
we can.
commit. It's
Yeah.
something that we are discussing, and I would like
Yep.
to see
I,
some
I
changes in the future from a player's point of view, of course.
definitely understand the frustrations.
Well, I'm also interested in the reason why there are no city battles in this game. I know there are city battles in the previous games. What were the creative decisions, or what were some of the problems that would occur if there were city battles?
I don't know for sure why the decision was made not to do those at all. Um, but I like just from a like seeing how the other battles work. Like if I think we'd run into a lot more pathing problems. Like it's a much more complex pathing situation if you have a bunch of buildings involved. You also run into the like so units are like artillery like fires and ballistic arcs, but like everything else is basically hit scan. So like if you could see it, you could shoot it. Like even if in theory like there's a house in the way. So like are you gonna display a blocked message to the player and they have to like side slide around the house until they can shoot? Like that's gonna be annoying. So I think at least part of it is that my assumption is part of it is just that it would cause too many pathing issues. And I guess
Okay.
I don't know if it's a situation where I guess I don't know the history well enough to say for sure if if many battles were actually fought in the cities. I don't recall that being the case, but I would not want to say anything definitive on that. But I would assume it's mostly a pathing issue and just adding maps is time consuming.
Have you
So
guys considered maybe adding ambushes to the game?
I think it's possible that some get added in the random battle scenarios that are getting set up. I, this is just my personal opinion. I have never
Mhm.
liked ambush battles in any time the Total War games have ever done them. Like I guess that's my primary experience with battles like that. But they just I've never enjoyed those battles. I don't think they play well. But for anyone who likes them, I'm not in charge of setting up those scenarios, so it's possible the person who is doing that does enjoy them. So maybe it's possible. Um, I guess if people are asking in terms of like being able to hide units on the global map and set up an ambush that way, I'm not sure if that would end up happening. Like that level of, I guess that level of stealth is not something that currently is supported on the global map. So I don't know. I guess I know that's probably not what people want to hear, but I feel like you can set up ambushes already. Like you draw out a garrison and you ambush it with not its full strength. Like you can absolutely set that up on the map. Um, I know some people really dislike that mechanic. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if I have more to say on that.
No,
If you have another direction to send that question, maybe I can come up with something else.
that's completely okay. The some of the changes I would like to see on the battlefield was maybe adding unit formations. We talked during one of my streams, and I think it would help a lot with replayability. Like if you could have like square formation for your guards or grenadiers, that would be really cool. Um, is this too much work?
Are you talking company level or regiment level?
I'm talking about company level. We talk about battles. So field battles, ability to switch between a line formation, a column formation, square formation. That will give you specific bonuses. Like, do you think this is possible to implement in the current game, or this will be too much work or too expensive, time
So
consuming?
Column formation is already in. You just have to, like, if you select a far enough distance away, which if I recall right is around double musket range, I think is what it's set to roughly at the moment. Like a unit will auto switch into column. And that's sort of how the Ultimate General games have always worked. That like that level of micro is not needed. If you're moving further away, you switch into it, and if you move closer, then the unit stays in line. I guess one of the things that we left in this game, which is not in the other ones, is previously you would auto break out of column if you got too close to an enemy unit and automatically spread out into line. In this game, we didn't put that in. So, like, if you want to send an assault column in, like, and then charge at the last second, like, you can do that. There are, if I'm remembering right, there are some bonuses to morale damage in column formation. So, like, there are some advantages doing to that. So that is an option. I do not recall if the tooltips reflect that at the moment, which they probably should if they don't. I'll have to look at that. In terms of square formation, I don't know. Again, this is just me speaking personally. I've never liked a lot of the formation buttons in the Total War games. It just feels like extra. You just click an extra button to get a buff, which I have never personally enjoyed. I guess in this game, I kind of look at it like if you want that, you should set multiple companies up in a square. Like if you want to protect your flanks, you can do that. I guess we do have the hold formation button, which is sort of that. Which, just to talk about it a little bit, like I have seriously debated like automating that functionality entirely, so you don't have to do it anymore. Part of the reason I haven't is because I know some players do enjoy like getting the extra advantage from the micro of using that. Like to me, it's pretty tedious because it's just like, why would you not use it? There's no real downside to it other than the unit won't rotate to fire at something if it moves. So I don't know. That's something where at one point I was going to change it, and then I saw some feedback from other people who really did not like that idea, so I didn't end up doing it.
Well, I think that we
Yeah.
talk about meaningful and something that's maybe not as meaningful. Like hold button yeah, like nothing serious is changing. If we talk about changing formation, I think that players should have more of a say in it. I also talked about maybe being able to use canister. Like if you're with your cannons, and sometimes they just want to use a round shot, even though they're very close. Maybe I'm like a pro choice guy. I like to have the option to switch between a canister and a round shot with my field gun, for example. Even though maybe they might be out of the range of the canister, and you guys can make it so the canister is weaker at a specific distance. It would be. It feels like you matter as a player. You have more options. You feel more valuable. Difficult to describe that, but having more options for a player, you might see it as a chore. But I think that a lot of players would feel like it's more meaningful.
I think if there's proper trade-offs, then it can be fine. I guess for some context, I haven't really played the Total. I played the first couple of Warhammer games from Total War. Before that, I think the last one I seriously played was probably Rome 2. But I've mostly fallen off those, so my perspective on those is probably a little out of date. But it just felt like it was never a should I do this. It was just now I hit the button. So I think if there were more trade-offs involved, that would be more interesting. I don't know. Not to say one way or the other, but I know a lot of people want Square. I don't feel like it actually adds a whole lot, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
Well, maybe this
And
could be a
other,
way to reward a player or getting a very expensive unit. Like guards are very expensive, so maybe giving them extra morale to like boost morale to nearby units, or giving them a square formation, or like a fire drill would be a really cool feature that would distinguish them from other units and make them maybe more viable economically, because they give you more on the battlefield. Some of the ideas I know they would take
yeah,
very long time to implement, or maybe current game engine is not meant for this and could create a lot of issues. Just spitballing, just talking about what could be done to make battles more interesting and give game more replayability. Yeah, that's it.
yeah, the morale one is definitely something that could be done, and I mean that's sort of like that sort of system is something I actually added in my mod as well. Like just nearby non-routing units provide a morale regeneration bonus. Routing units provide a penalty. The only thing that's I would have to see, like some of those checks are not necessarily very efficient depending on what you're doing. So sometimes adding that can be bad. That sort of stuff can be bad for performance. That would be the only real reason not to. Some of it is just there's always more ideas than there are time to implement. So it's sort of like, okay, what am I going to spend my time on today to try and add? So I don't know. Like more formations are not necessarily out of the question, but I don't know if they're going to get added. Just depends what priorities end up being. I know we've talked about the cannon thing in the past. The tricky thing with if you set to just canister, you can get into some weird situations where like you're showing the arc of the canister range, but the unit doesn't quite register and doesn't want to actually fire it or wants to fire solid shot. The not firing canister at all and only firing solid shot there might be some technical problems with that. Just because like you may have noticed that like if you walk a unit in front of a cannon firing solid shot, it doesn't get hit. Like it's only the impact point of like further on of the ball that actually deals damage. And that was changed quite a while back, just because it was very frustrating to have to try and keep your units from ever walking in front of cannons. So that was, and I know I say that, and I know people want it for canister. I guess I'll say it's a situation I'm looking at. I haven't made a decision one way or the other yet on what the best option there is.
There was a question from one of my subscribers. Is it possible to expand the map to Nova Scotia? Some people talked about it even before. Do you think that map is kind of fixed? That there will be no changes on the grand map? Or...
As far as I am aware, the map will not be expanding further at this time.
Hmm. Okay, makes sense.
I know people want it. Just to talk about it a little bit, I'm not entirely convinced that adding Nova Scotia fixes the problems that people want it to fix. Like, if you add it, the player's just going to conquer up there anyways, and you're going to end up in basically the same problem. So it would be cool to have. Certainly, like, if the map was a little bit, like, the larger the map is, the more opportunities there are in some cases. But I think at this stage, I don't think the map is going to expand. At least as far as I know.
That's clear. And considering the game roadmap, where is the project right now? If we talk about percentage of completion.
I would say that's a question for Sterner. I can't answer that one.
Okay, not a problem. Do you know when the game would get out on early access, or what are the projections?
I believe I'm trying to remember what was said officially. It's what I think it was. I believe the game went into early access. What was it, around July? So, and I think they said it was gonna be about a year before it came out of early access, is vaguely what I recall. But again, I would say I know whatever has been published officially.
Okay, well, things can change, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
There could be some delays.
Circumstances adjust.
Going normal. Well, do you guys intend to continue development of the game even after early access, or?
I guess all I can say on that is in the past, Game Labs has continued to work on the game for at least some period after the full release. How long that is, or if that will be different from other games, I do not know.
Maybe it's a matter of finance, how well the game sells, and
yep.
Okay,
that'll be a business decision at some point.
Should we expect game expansions? Maybe in the form of a DLC in the future? Is this on the table?
I think it has been. I'm trying to remember what Sterner has said about this. I think it has been floated as a possibility. And I believe because I believe the Steam edition mentioned something about additional content, like access to additional content at some point. So I believe there is something coming. But whatever has made it into those Steam announcements threads is as much information as I have.
Mm-hmm. Well, can we expect maybe a new campaign, or should we just expect like new units, new regiments? Do you have any information?
We'll have to wait and see for an announcement.
Okay, that's cool. Well, is there a plan for a multiplayer?
I doubt it. Like, it just hasn't been a focus of these games since Gettysburg. I know some people really like it. I guess I believe what Sterner has said in the past is anything is possible, but it's not currently planned.
Mm-hmm. And this is strictly personal question. What would you like the next historical setting for Ultimate General to be?
I mean, the big one everyone is excited about is Napoleon. Like, I think there's some interesting options there. Having switched from like the Civil War era to the Revolutionary era, in some ways I wouldn't mind something a little bit later on. Just I feel like I really like the Civil War era dynamic in terms of, like, you still have muskets, you still have rifles, you're still using smoothbore cannon, you have rifled cannon that are relevant. Like it's just a very it's a great time period in terms of lots of options for weapons, and I'm sure you can come up with something in other eras. We had to stretch a little bit with Revolution to get some of those, but it certainly worked out. Um, I personally, from a balance perspective, I would like to go back to something with like closer to like brigade sizes. I just feel like there's more design space available when the units are a bit larger. Companies there's just not a lot of HP to work with, so they can get destroyed pretty quickly, which complicates things.
Mhm. Well, I think that people would be very excited about the Napoleonic game. Do you think that the current development could help this type of complexity? Like, there's more complexity in Napoleonic Europe than there is in American Revolution. So you'll have multiple factions, everything happening. Do you think this will be a bigger challenge for developers?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely like adding more nations, adding a larger map, like all of that adds complexity. I think this could definitely be seen as a stepping stone to that. I'm not confirming anything one way or the other, but you know, obviously that's been the popular speculation. We'll see what happens. And there's always the question of, do you keep going down this route? Do you go back to a linear campaign? Do you focus on naval again? Um, that's there's lots of options, but we'll just have to see where things go.
Well, that would be exciting thing to see for an Ultimate General game. I think that there are not many competitors these days. Maybe Creative Assembly is moving on to fantasy more and more, and I think there's a lot of room for a good game. Panda, thank you so much for being here today. I had a lot of fun chatting with you, and I know it's very late where you live, so I would not like to bother you too much. But once again, I appreciate you being here and just talking to me. I hope I didn't get you into any kind of trouble with your team.
Oh, I hope not. I don't think I said anything I wasn't supposed to, but no, it was fun chatting. I really do enjoy talking about these things. I don't always have the time as that I would like to be able to do it on streams or on Discord or whatnot. But if I didn't enjoy getting into the details of this stuff, I wouldn't be doing this anymore. So, well, appreciate you having me. It was fun talking with you, and we'll see what the future holds.
I'm excited to see it.